Hi, well, it's my pleasure to introduce John, who many or most of you are very familiar with, but let me introduce him by saying that composer, clarinetist, and bass clarinetist John Russell, born in 1979, creates music by turns tender and fierce, playful and profound, raw and refined, propulsive and still. In his work, he seeks to embody and express the full range of human experience in a way that speaks directly to people's hearts, minds, and bodies. The extraordinary sound and spirit of the bass clarinet is a driving force behind much of Jonathan's work. His numerous compositions for bass clarinet include solo works, sonatas, concertos, that's in the plural, duets, trios, quartets, chamber works, and large bass clarinet ensembles. He was a longtime member of the Edmund Wells Bass Clarinet Quartet, is a current member of the Squonk Bass Clarinet Duo, and is founder and leader of the Improbable Beasts, a 15-member professional bass clarinet ensemble in the Boston area. I proposed this session because of my great respect for John's work in so many different ways, and because I wanted to learn more about his unique creative path. I had some questions that it would amount to a composition lesson if I wanted to pay John to answer these questions for me, but I thought this is a better setting and that everybody can benefit from. And before we get to the real conversation, John, you wanted to start with an audio clip, with a YouTube clip?
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and I hope this is an enjoyable session for you. So I'm going to start with a short video clip. This is Squonklet number one, which some of you may know. Oh, sorry, I got to do the screen sharing. Pardon me. Share. Everybody see that? Yeah? Okay, here we go.
That reminded me of one of the reasons why I love your music so much, John. That and saying seriously that there can be levity and humor without being in the way of, but helping out to form the serious construction that's just part of the mood curve. Which
Yeah.
also reminded me 5 days before Halloween that if everybody doesn't know this yet, it was the first time I ever heard of Squonk or you and Jeff. There is online, I think it's still online on YouTube, a Halloween concert with
Yeah.
an incredible transcription and performance by John with Jeff of the Bach Toccata in Fugue in D minor, or E minor if you're a bass clarinetist,
Although
which
we play it in C
you
concert.
played in. Yeah. Okay. So everybody, if you're doing Halloween parties or decorations, get that queued up because it sounds amazing.
Thank you. You can also see in that video we dressed up our bass clarinets to have wings and googly eyes. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. So getting to the first question and really what prompted me in the first place is that almost 3 years ago, we had the first ever Low Clarinet Festival. It was January 23. And there was a session with several of the headliners talking to the audience about various things. And you said at one point, I don't remember the question you were answering, but that you had learned and grown a lot from taking classes at an improv theater that led to your cultivating your creativity and a lot of points of view or inner skills. And I don't know what that means other than that it's really interesting and enticing. So could you tell us more about that and how it affected your creativity and
Yeah,
also how everyone else who's a performer or a creative composer can learn from that?
sure. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So it started, I spent 4 years living in London from 2013 to 2017. And one of the things my wife and I discovered in London was there was this improv troupe that would improvise entire musicals. They were called the Showstoppers. And so they would improvise basically like 90-minute musicals. There'd be some prompts from the audience to get them started. And it was just really hilarious and really impressive. And we got kind of obsessed with them. And there was one performer in that group, especially who we especially like, named Pippa Evans. Um, and she has a book called Improv Your Life, which is sort of about applying the principles of improv comedy to the rest of your life, sort of general life skills derived from improv comedy. Um, so then after we moved back from London, I took some improv classes. There's a place right near me here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Unfortunately, they didn't survive the pandemic, but before that, I was taking these improv comedy classes. And so between sort of becoming obsessed with the Showstoppers and reading Pippa's book and taking this class, um, there's a few different interesting principles that can affect how you approach music. One that a lot of people probably know about is the idea of yes and, which is almost sort of a cliche in improv comedy circles. Um, the idea is that it's a way of kind of affirming what someone else has done and building on it. So if your partner in the scene says, "Oh, look, there's a river over there," if you say that's not a river, that's just a puddle, that kind of shuts the scene down, right? But if you say, "Oh, yes, there's a river, and look, there's a boat on the river," and they say, "Oh, yes, there's a boat, and there's a pirate flag on it," and they say, "Oh, yes, there's a pirate flag." Uh-oh. So, one of the first things you practice in improv comedy is this kind of yes anding of your partner and building scenes that way. And that isn't so applicable to composing necessarily, but it can be very applicable to performing, to working with other people in a performance, sort of trying to build on their ideas. Certainly for improvising music, it's very useful. And I also find it very useful in life generally, especially with parenting. It can be a very useful approach to things. But the other principle, which I learned about in Pippa Evans' book and somewhat in my classes as well, which I think about a lot more directly with composing, is the concept of follow your obvious, which is the subtitle of this session. And what that means is, like, let's say you're trying to improvise a scene with somebody. The temptation is, oh, I want to try to make this like really clever, or I want to try to make this really funny, or I want to try to make this like really original. But if you take that approach to it, you're more likely to kind of get a little bit stuck or actually create something that's not so clever, because two people trying to be clever are more likely to do something similar to each other. Whereas if you follow your obvious, just kind of do the thing that seems most obvious to you in that scene. First of all, you can do it with full commitment because you're not trying to kind of figure out what would be cool to do. You're just going with your instinct. And also because we're all different, we're all kind of weird in our own way. What's obvious to you actually may not be obvious to other people. So, and it's very effective in terms of scene building. point is, if you actually kind of do what feels obvious to you as a composer, you're more likely to create something original and interesting than if you're actively trying to be original and interesting and different. And so, that's at a big. I realized it's something I was sort of somewhat already thinking about in my approach. Um, but I think that's really informed my approach to composing a lot and trying to sort of stay in touch with, well, embracing what feels kind of obvious to me.
And how did that affect the music that you were writing before that started? Before that awareness started and then after?
Yeah, I think I became more comfortable with writing music that was more kind of sincere and more direct and more, you know, possibly even cheesy or derivative.
Hmm.
Um, because what I realized is that in a way, kind of the worst thing to do is to be sort of go halfway to being obvious and then to kind of chicken out. Because then you can start doing things that you sort of are embodying, this idea, but then, and I feel like I hear this a lot with composition students where it's like, um, they might have this idea, but then they feel like, oh well, I should make it a little bit more complicated, or oh, well, I need to throw some extended techniques in there to show that I know how to do that. And then you kind of lose touch with that sort of that impulse that is really kind of who you are. So I think part of it has been I've gotten more comfortable with kind of trusting that instinct and that impulse and kind of following it all the way to its logical conclusion. And I think it's enabled me to create more powerful music, basically.
Just a relevant aside, what you're saying, um, having listened to hundreds of submissions for various things, very often with less experienced composers, you can hear exactly that. They have a voice and then it disappears
Hmm.
within the piece. And I think school can do that because school wants you to learn everything,
Yeah,
which is fair enough. But then I don't want to use the word maturity, but experience and finding yourself and your personal obvious is saying, okay, I know what I want to do. Like my teacher's not going to see it. I'm giving this to clarinetists. I'm not giving it to composers to,
right.
right?
Yeah, and
And
it's
then you
it
tell
can be
one
scary.
story.
It
Yeah,
can be scary because you're really putting yourself out there. You're sort of hiding behind techniques or, um, you know. So it's it can be a scary thing to do, and that's also I think why maybe if you're starting out as a composer, you may feel like, well, I want to hide behind something a little bit, which is an impulse I can understand, but I think you're better off if you try to kind of push through that.
right. So I'm going to go off my script and then ask you.
Sure.
So part of that means that everything you write sounds like your music or it sounds like the ideas that have come out of your head, which is not a restriction at all to be narrow, but to be genuine.
Yeah.
And so when you're writing a piece, sometimes your pieces, like most composers, might have an abrupt change of mood, tempo, whatever, whether or not it's programmatic, which sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. What thoughts go through your head, if any, about is this too close to the first section or is it too different and irrelevant to, is that part of this?
Yeah, I think it's very context dependent. I do find um, often if because this is a very common situation you're composing. You come up with like a great minute and a half, and then you're like, now what? What's next, right? Do I continue this or do something contrasting? Um, and often you just kind of have to live with it for a while, try lots of different things. One thing I've definitely learned over the years is there's really no substitute for trial and error. Like you can sort of try to theorize your way to, oh, that seems like this is what this should be, or come up with kind of some scheme for it. But really, you just have to try it, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, and that's really kind of an instinctual decision about whether or not that works or that's the right thing. So I think for many years I sort of hoped that eventually I'd kind of learn like some shortcuts. um, but so far, at least, it hasn't really happened. I would say the one thing I've gotten better at is identifying like a dead end sooner in the process, so I can move on from it more quickly.
I've got a related follow-up that will flow naturally from the next main question.
Right.
So I'll say that. Do you want to stick with this or should we move to the next topic because time flies when we're doing this? Or do you want to play another clip of something?
Well, just thinking about the idea of follow your obvious. I mean, I was thinking I could play the beginning of Still Here.
Hmm.
which was the first consortium commission I did for clarinet and piano. Some of you might have heard the orchestra version of it at Clarinet Fest this past summer. Um, but that piece, the opening melody, it's a very kind of simple, very direct melody. And when I came up with it, I really thought, I thought it's possible this already exists. Like maybe I stole this from somewhere. I don't know. Um, and I finally decided, it doesn't really matter. Like if I realize later on that this is partially a quote of something else, like that was still operating in my subconsciousness and still related to the idea of this piece, so it's okay. And then the last one of it is also sort of a klezmer tune kind of thing. So I think they're both like kind of good examples of this idea of following your obvious. So I thought I'd play a little bit of those. So here is the beginning of Still Here, clarinet piano.
Sound?
Can you hear it?
No.
Oh, hold on. Sorry.
Oh, it started a sound at the end.
There, can you hear now?
Yeah.
I'll just go back. Sorry about that. Now it's sharing sound. So I'll just play that much for now. And so that's an example of, I think when I was younger, I probably would have felt like I ought to, make the meter a little bit odd or like add some strange chromatic notes in there or something like that, thinking that that would make it more kind of me or more unique. But actually, having it just be this very kind of direct, clear, folk-like melody, actually, that's following my obvious, and that, especially the way it unfolds across the whole piece and the subject matter, which is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think that ends up being much more effective than if I sort of tried to make it more complicated.
What's interesting is that the first time I heard this sitting in an audience, I didn't know how long the whole piece was. And I didn't know where you were going with that long, slow diatonic beginning that didn't sound all that much like your other music in some ways.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
sitting here now, and for anybody watching who hasn't heard the piece, we know that it's the beginning of a 22.5 minute piece by what we saw at the bottom of the YouTube. And
yeah,
somehow or other, it's like the opening of a movie because you know it's a setup for a
yeah,
lot that's about to happen.
yeah,
Not that it's just interesting. Um, so changing topics a little bit,
yep,
everything's related. You've had some really large consortium commissions, and it's also interesting that whereas most composer commissions are administered by a performing organization who wants to bring in the composer, probably because you do so much of your own performing of your own pieces as the center of it. You've been the coordinator for many of these, and which means you're asking your friends for money or your fans, which some people can do and some people don't feel comfortable with. But what really struck me is most recently with the Squawklet series, the part of the benefit of being in the consortium is watching you work. So most composers don't want to show their interim drafts because they want to wait until they want to show their best foot forward only. Don't give anyone a chance to say, did I spend money on, I don't like it as much. Right. And so Brahms burned many of his or most of his outtakes or drafts that became superseded, whereas you were actually emailing them to your fans and your sponsors. So could you talk about how that relates to everything that we've been talking about and what we haven't, both the confidence to be asking for financial support from your friends, as well as showing everybody what you're working on and knowing like, because I assume there's also drafts that you didn't show, like maybe those
Yeah.
were halfway ready. All the
Yeah,
answers you can give because we have time.
yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, in terms of, I mean, I hope with something like consortium, to me, I actually find that an easier ask than fundraising for something because I feel like, I'm offering an actual product in return, right? Which is early access to this composition. And, I before I did my first consortium, which was for Still Here, I looked at several other examples. And, one thing that often is offered is some kind of behind the scenes access, and that's often, if you look at things like Patreon or other sorts of platforms like that, that's often one of the perks that people are offering because that presumably has some value. So I decided I wanted to have that. I didn't really know what that would look like at first, and I was really anxious about it because I thought maybe this will be inhibiting if I try to let people in, open up this process. Maybe I won't be able to be like maybe it will affect what I actually create if I'm nervous about sharing it. But I actually basically found it to have the opposite effect. I found it to be very kind of empowering. There's something that can be feel very good about having a community kind of involved through more of the process rather than you just being this completely solitary thing that you then present to the world. Um, and the other aspect of it is I really like the idea of trying to demystify the composing process and trying to make people realize that it's not something that kind of only geniuses can do. It's this very sort of ordinary thing. It's very approachable. There's a lot of kind of trial and error, a lot of false starts. So I mean, I love Brahms's music, but I actually am kind of annoyed by his approach to that. Like I think it'd be so helpful for us to be able to see like how did he get there? Where was how did this come? It seems like he's sort of trying to he sort of wants to enhance this kind of myth of the composer genius, which I think is not helpful. And as much as I love Brahms's music, I'm a little pissed at him about that, honestly.
Well, there's a book, I think it's still available from Dover or Norton called Beethoven Sketches
Yeah,
because he left them.
yeah, and it's fascinating, right? I mean, you
Yeah,
learn so
yeah.
much.
Hmm.
And the other thing is, as composers often sort of have stories about their creative process. Like I was completely stuck on this piece, and then I heard the garbage truck coming, and the rhythm of the motor like inspired me, and that got me unstuck. Which may be true, but what the composer maybe is not saying is that a week before, when the street sweeper came by, like they also got a rhythm in their head, and 2 days later decided it was crap and it wasn't leaning anywhere, right? So that's sort of what I wanted to try to show with this is that because I sense, it's very much in the moment. So I might be really excited about this idea. I sent it out to everybody. I'm really excited about it. Maybe I stay excited about it, becomes the heart of the piece, but fairly often, a week later, I'm like, actually, I'm sick of that idea. It's not the right thing. I totally thought it was. So I think kind of seeing in real time that process, I hope is interesting, and I hope also is encouraging, especially maybe for young composers who are starting out, or clarinetists who maybe don't think they're composers but might want to give it a try, which I really encourage people to do. Um, and then the other thing is, I think for me, composing really is about vulnerability. Like I really think if you're not sort of willing or to make yourself vulnerable, then I'm not, I don't really understand what the purpose is because, we only have this one life, right? You get this amazing opportunity to kind of share this thing you're creating with people. Why not just, if you're not really going to go for it and really sort of be honest about it, then, what are you getting out of it? There's not enough, there's not enough potential ego reward for that to be sufficient reason to do it. So yeah.
I want to follow up with vulnerability. But while we're on this topic of the sharing the sketches, do you think it's a coincidence or very conscious that the piece where you did that and sending out the sketches and so on was a bunch of short works where you could have double lines as opposed to or double bars and endings as opposed to a 22-minute through
Well,
composed piece.
but
Could you would you do that?
I
Yeah.
did that with Still Here. Still Here was a consortium. So that was actually
Mhm.
the first piece that I did that with.
Sending sketches.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing that can be helpful about it is it kind of encourages me to get my ideas into a sort of more concrete form earlier on in the process because people are paying money for this. I want to have something to share. It doesn't have to be every week, but on a fairly regular basis. Um, and I actually, it's a little bit like when you back when I had composition lessons where every week you have to like pull something together to show your teacher. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that it can also be like a positive motivation, at least for me, to try to make some things more concrete, sort of commit to things a little bit earlier on in the process, even if you end up changing your mind. At least you sort of have to formulate it in something that's shareable. Um, and yeah, so it doesn't the squonklets happen to be these short pieces, but it isn't always like that.
Yeah. So getting back to vulnerability, um, you are, I think, probably on one side of the curve of composers who are objective, subjective, personal,
Mm.
impersonal, and so on, just the way that you said. And I've heard stand-up comics. I had a composition teacher who said, when it's just you and your music, or you or your music on that stage, you are naked.
Yeah,
And very emphatically, there you are never so vulnerable because there's nothing there except what's coming out of your mind and your heart. It's like
right.
you're not part of it. It's not like when you're playing in an ensemble, someone else's music, which is still very vulnerable. I don't mean to say that's not, but you're 100% it. You know,
Yeah,
when it's you, like you open your skin, it's that
yeah.
kind of openness. On that note, I know that you like using On Sorrow as
Mhm.
maybe a real ultimate example of that. Can you tell us about
Yeah,
that or in play some maybe?
yeah. I'll talk about it a little bit, and then I'll play some of it. So this was a very important piece for me. Um, I wrote this piece in 2018, and in 2017, my wife was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, and that's ultimately why we left London, moved back to the U.S. Very difficult time. Sort of the uncertainty of the diagnosis at first, not knowing whether, there was a week or two where it's like this might be benign, everything might be totally fine, or she might have a month to live. We just don't know. Um, and then seeing her going through the whole treatment process, we had a 1.5-year-old child at the time. So all of that, and at the time, as I think often happens when people face crises of various sorts, it was just I was very kind of down to business. Like, okay, what do we need to do next? When is her next appointment? How do we need to get her there? What are we going to do about childcare? Kind of just sort of because in order to survive that, you have to just kind of like be very much in there, taking care of all the logistics. Um, but then once we were maybe 6 months into it, she'd been through chemo, she'd had her mastectomy, things had sort of settled down a bit. It was clear that, she wasn't about to die. Like this, the long-term prognosis was still uncertain, but um, we were sort of through the most immediately challenging part. Suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, I have all this emotion to process that I haven't yet because I've been so focused on the logistics. And I happened to have a commission at the time for a bass clarinet and string quartet piece. Um, and so that sort of became a way for me to process some of this. And the thing that really, it's called On Sorrow, and it's basically about sorrow, which isn't, I wasn't really feeling sorrow at the time. It was more like anxiety and stress and worry. But yeah, I felt like it made me much more acutely aware of kind of the sorrow all around me. I remember one day going for a walk into Boston just to kind of think about the piece and just passing everybody on the street and realizing like they have no idea that I'm carrying this huge weight right now, and I have no idea what they're carrying either. But everybody has these sorrows. Another thing, sort of a side note, when I lived in London, I was music director at a Unitarian congregation there, and every Sunday during the service they would have candles of joy and sorrow, where people would light a candle and say something that they were either feeling joy about or sorrow about, and you really kind of realize just how much people are caring that you would never know otherwise. very sad things like the death of a loved one, and more sort of complicated things like estrangement from a sibling or a child or all those kinds of things. So anyway, so this experience just made me feel much more kind of acutely aware of sorrow, and so a way of sort of processing my own. It's not really. There was some grief too about having to leave London unexpectedly, but the thing is, this was the first time I felt like I wrote a piece where I genuinely like didn't care at all about where it fit into history or the style, or it just felt like something I needed to create, and I didn't wasn't concerned with how it reflected on me. So I'll play a little bit of kind of the main melody of that from the first movement, so you can hear that. Okay, so here we go, and this is the Jeff Anderley playing it. Stop there. That's the end of the first movement and into the second.
Wow. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so the most kind of outwardly emotional, kind of romantic sort of thing I created up to that point, and I feel like after that, something kind of shifted for me where I just felt much more comfortable, embracing that very sort of direct, vulnerable approach.
Yeah. One thing that I've become more aware of in the last half hour is that you play by your own rules, which I've always known anyway, but it's become, I think, more salient that you don't do what people might expect you to, or, you do what you need to do and it's organic and it always works. And being a performer and creating your own group, which how many performers have actually created their own group, which is more or less their repertory company? It doesn't
You're
happen a
talking
lot,
about
especially with 15 bass clarinet players, like all excellent and in the Boston area. That's so cool. I have a feeling this is a good time to switch over to Q&A, unless you have anything else that you want to add in.
yeah, no, I'm happy to hear from the
Hmm.
audience. Have things they're curious about. Yeah.
Feel free to turn on your own mics.
I know some people here have been in some of these consortiums, so I'm curious if you have any thoughts to share about that as well.
Don't be shy.
We keep
I'll,
talking. Oh,
If you're shy, I'll ask John some more
yeah, here's
questions.
somebody.
I'll ask a question, just to get people get their feet wet in here. But John, what is the most difficult um part of starting a new piece for you?
Um, I don't tend to have a lot of trouble starting. Um, I don't really suffer from writer's block particularly. Like I always have, I have like a whole backlog of ideas that haven't found their way into pieces. So I can always, if nothing else, I can always kind of start in there. For me, the most difficult part often comes a bit later, like because the beginning for me is really fun. I'm just like playing around. There's no commitment. I'm just like exploring lots of stuff. And then at some point, I have to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to choose to kind of have the piece be centered on. And that's when you start to kind of limit possibilities, right? Because if you start going in this direction, then it won't make sense to go in that direction anymore. So that's where I often find more challenge is kind of after I've been at the piece for a few weeks and I have to start making some decisions about what it's really about. And there's really no kind of there's like I've said before, trial and error, just lots of trial and error. Try this, does this feel right? Nope. Okay, try something else. Does that feel right? That kind of thing.
So Rachel Yoder typed in, curious if you use improvisation to generate musical material for your composition.
Absolutely, very frequently. I find it, and especially increasingly so as I get older, I find it a very powerful resource. Often, if I come up with sort of some kind of initial idea for a piece, I'll just improvise myself, riffing on it for kind of as long as I can sustain, interest in it. And, pretty often, not everything from that session, but good chunks of that initial session will make it into the final piece. And because I often find that your initial impulse is often very reliable. I found just through trial and error over the years.
So do you write at the piano when you say improvising?
Sometimes, I mean, sometimes if it's a bass clarinet piece, and I'll often do it on bass. Like squonklets are composed almost exclusively on the bass clarinet,
Mhm.
but sometimes it's also at the piano. Yeah, it can.
And MIDI playback, like to mess around with?
Yeah, I also use so I try to kind of be very flexible with the tools I use. So I definitely use notation software, MIDI playback. I also do plenty of pencil and manuscript paper, which is I mean I try to not give deference to technology just because it's newer. And pencil and manuscript paper is extremely useful because you can do things like having, three different versions of the same bar on top of each other and kind of look at them all. And you can, it's very easy to add an extra beat to a bar. All that stuff is much more cumbersome in notation software. And also notation software, you can kind of get kind of boxed in where it becomes very easy to just kind of feel like this is the version. Whereas I find that things are much more sort of open and fluid when I'm working with manuscript paper and pencil. And then I also do a lot recording myself, especially when it's a clarinet or bass clarinet piece. And I also find that can be a very good way to work because when I'm not thinking about notation, it just sort of uses a different part of my brain. I get to different places.
So I don't know too many composers alive today who are real frontline headliner performers and also frontline headliner composers, which means you spend a lot of time on each of those. Do you have ways that you force yourself to not forsake one if you're hot on the other, or?
I mean, to some extent, I do forsake. I mean, like right now, I'm very much in composing zone, and I'm not really practicing that much, honestly. But I mean, the most effective way is I often write stuff for myself to play, right? So it's
Mhm.
like there's this kind of feedback loop, and I don't think I would have whatever status I have as a performer if I weren't a composer, because it's mostly through performing my own music. And similar with a composer,
Mhm.
definitely the most success I've had as a composer has been because I'm able to perform my own music. When I was first starting out with bass clarinet and composing, I would very intentionally write bass clarinet pieces that were too hard for me to play, so that I would have to improve my technique to be able to play them. So there's sort of a feedback loop going on, I would say.
Is that where those high, high, high
Yeah,
E's come from?
exactly. Yeah.
More people, please talk or type because we still have a little time. And if not, John, do you want to play another clip as long as you've got a captive audience?
Sure. Let me think. Could do another little bit of Improbable Beasts.
Whatever
Um,
you want. Yeah.
yeah, I'll do a bit of the Requiem. So this was an important composition for me for the Improbable Beasts. It's for 14 bass clarinets. It's called a Requiem for 2020. And this is actually one of those pandemic era, everyone in their own box videos. So I'll just play a little bit of that as long as there's no other questions right now. All right, here we go. Yeah, there's a lot of other that
Wow.
piece. A
Yeah.
lot of, so it's hard to choose which section, but I think that highlights the kind of 14-part counterpoint.
Right. So in the meantime, during that, Jason Alder wrote in, this is probably a whole lecture on its own, but do you have any specific ways that you deal with writing for a monochromatic ensemble like Beasts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I don't think it would work as well for most instruments. I think the bass clarinet has sort of a uniquely large range of colors available. So you can have, people playing those like low groovy bass lines. And you can also have, the kind of high wailing, shrieky stuff. You can have like very articulate stuff or very smooth things. And of course, also the range is huge. You can really cover, the range of multiple other instruments. Um, so I think that helps a lot. And one thing I really like about it is that you have the option of going between this like very homogeneous, you can have like these 8-part chords that just totally resonate and sound like one organ kind of instrument. And you can also have like very sort of intricate textures with, the instruments doing really different things from each other. So there's no kind of hard and fast rule about it. It's again, it's sort of following my instinct a lot. And the other thing actually that's very helpful about it is I can, I always make mock-ups of everything playing myself. So I can really kind of test it all out with the real instruments, which, I've gotten so used to that now that I write for other instruments, I'm like, wait, I just have to like imagine what this is going to sound like. That's, that seems really daunting. Yeah.
Have you ever transcribed Beasts compositions for a standard clarinet choir so more people can play it?
Yeah, I've done that with a few of them. And I'd like to do that with more. Um, yeah, and it's, because the range is so big, it actually, yeah, I don't really have to change much to make it work.
Right. So Jessica asks, can you talk a bit more about your influences as a composer and player?
Yeah, sure. So I basically grew up as a classical clarinetist, playing all the standard classical rep. My parents are both classical musicians. So that was kind of the world I grew up in. And then the first kind of more contemporary music I got really obsessed with the Rite of Spring when I was in high school. And my first several pieces are basically Rite of Spring knockoffs, I would say. Um, And then, some other composers that are important to me are Mahler. Really love Mahler symphonies, and also, talk about sort of being direct and vulnerable, and kind of like not holding anything back. I admire that about Mahler's composing. And then Olivier Messiaen also is a really important composer for me for a while. I'm not sure how much of that you hear in my music now, but 20 years ago, there's a lot of that in it. And then I also got really interested in some jazz composers, especially Charles Mingus. I love Charles Mingus's music, just kind of the freedom and the wildness of it. And that's sort of been an impact on me as a composer and a player. And of course, Eric Dolphy, as a player. That's really hearing Eric Dolphy play bass clarinet was what got me excited about bass clarinet. If anyone doesn't know, Eric Dolphy was this phenomenal jazz musician in the 60s who played flute, saxophone, and most notably bass clarinet at a very virtuosic level. And then klezmer music is also a very important influence on me. I started playing klezmer music in my 20s. And at a time when I sort of wasn't doing much classical music at all, I was playing at Evan Wells, the heavy metal bass clarinet quartet, and I was doing squonk, and I was doing a lot of klezmer music. And I played in a klezmer band for a while and wrote some tunes for the klezmer band. And I don't actually do a lot of klezmer playing now, but it's definitely kind of in there in the background in a lot of my music. And then also kind of heavy metal, hard rock music, which I grew up listening and loving, and then also played on bass clarinet in Evan Wells, and that's definitely left a major mark on my work.
You had mentioned Steve Reich also
Yeah, I
in a
also
certain way. Yeah.
a minimalist phase, and especially Steve Reich and Philip Glass. Yeah, that's also an influence for sure.
We're over time, but I don't care. I'm glad to stay here as long as you do, and until we have to get off. More questions from anyone? And if not, you want to play. What are you listening to now?
I'm obsessed with Brahms' Second Piano Concerto right now. My wife recently played in an orchestra concert where they did Brahms' First Symphony and First Piano Concerto. And I also really like the First Piano Concerto, but the Second Piano Concerto, I don't know, there's something about that, especially the first two movements. So I'm in a little bit of, I would say a little bit of a Brahms kick right now. It's interesting that we started the session talking about Brahms, who's a composer who I really love. Yeah, so that's the main thing I'm listening to right now, actually, is Brahms.
And what are you writing now?
I'm working on a clarinet and string quartet piece. It's a small consortium. There's three members of it who are paying a bit more than and so and actually I'm really having fun with that. It's a much more I've been writing I feel like I've been writing a lot of squonklets aside. I've been writing a lot of kind of serious heavy music lately, and this so far is a bit more kind of playful and fun, which I'm enjoying.
Is that for you as the clarinetist?
No, it's actually not. Yeah. Although I probably will play it at some point, and
But they each have it's three different clarinetists who will be.
Yeah, three different clarinets.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, great if it's you, but more people know it from the beginning that way if it's all the different people. When is that set to be finished and available, and when can we hear it?
March 2026, but then they'll have a year of exclusivity after that. So it won't be available to the general public until March 2027.
So I'm also wondering about when you say you've mocked up your improbable pieces with you playing every part. I want to hear that.
Yeah, well, I do have one album from the depths, which is some of the improbable repertoire, but it's just me multi-tracking myself. But then also, yeah, whenever I write a new tune for the Beasts, I make up, rather than doing the MIDI playback, which is getting better and better, every year. But since I'm playing it myself as part of the composing process anyway, it's not that much of an extra step to just make the full recording of it.
So after you wrote Unsorrow, which was such I don't want to say a transition, but a certain kind of experience, was your future music or the music after that affected by ways that you had liberated some ways of thinking through that?
I think so. I think so. I mean, not every single piece. Actually, one of the dangers of writing a piece that you feel like is very successful is that then you sort of try to repeat that. And I find that is usually a losing strategy to sort of try to replicate something that worked before. So, but I did feel like it kind of opened up this connection to something kind of deeper in me, to being sort of more comfortable with expressing deeper emotions through my music, and feeling sort of more confident that I was capable of doing it in a way that was, that would connect with other people as well. So pieces like the Requiem for 2020, this piece I have, We Are Broken for a bass clarinet ensemble, Still Here. To me, those are all pieces that tap into kind of a much sort of deeper, more vulnerable place than stuff I'd written before I wrote On Sorrow.
So
You
I'm
know,
looking at, yeah, I'm looking at,
oh, sorry. I was
uh,
going to still write sort of playful pieces too, like Satan's Ice Cream Truck, which some of you heard in Dublin. So it's not, there's that side of me is still there for sure.
I'm looking at titles like You Are the Universe and Ecstatic Motion and the Midway Blues. And I don't know those pieces. I just know those titles.
Yeah.
Can you play those or tell us about
Oh,
them? Or?
yeah. So You're the Universe in Ecstatic Motion. Actually, I think I do have a clip of that ready to go, so I can play a little bit of that. That's from a Rumi quote. Rumi is a medieval Islamic poet, mystic, religious figure. A lot of really beautiful poetry. And so the quote was, I'm blanking on it right now. Oh, I think it's in the video actually. So let me find the video. Um, Here it is. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. Do I have the quote here? Oh yeah. Do not feel lonely. The entire universe is inside you. Stop acting so small. You are the universe in ecstatic motion. Set your life on fire. Seek those who fan your flames. So I will play some of this. We're starting partway through it. I'll stop there for now. So
Is
that
that
was
available for full clarinet choir? Because that would really work without even changing registers.
yeah, that one is not, but that would make sense to arrange that one for
Yeah,
sure.
it's gorgeous.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Rumi, yeah, for people who might know his other writings, Rumi is the one who wrote the poem that includes "We are one, we are all different, we are all the same,"
yeah,
which is, yeah,
yeah. So yeah, I mean that's the thing that's fun about responding to poetry or images is that it can bring something different out. So that ended up being a much more kind of like floating sort of piece than I've written for the Beasts before. Before.
yeah. So I think we've run through our hour before next session start in a few minutes. And for anyone who has friends who wanted to see this or you think will want to see it, I believe, Jessica, there will be a YouTube later
Yeah, as
of
soon as
this.
I get the link back from Zoom, I'll edit it and upload it, and that will be replaced on the website so you can access it, especially if you joined late and you missed some of that early conversation, which was just so great.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there are a lot of people who had conflicts with this time, and it's wonderful. Thank you, Jessica and ICA and Tom Piercy for putting everything together.
Yeah, thank you
And
all.
yeah.